I am going to be somebody.
Anyways, that guy was a massive dickhead.
Super Happy Fun Clown. This one is directed by Patrick Rea and is a low budget kind of serial killer slasher movie from 2025. So, we've seen plenty of killer clown movies at this point, haven't we? But here we have a female perspective on one. So the story is it follows this woman who may have been something special. You know, she was quite smart as a kid. She was valedictorian. She was clearly quite intelligent. And she had opportunities in her life where she could have had fame. She had a kind of a spout at a young age of acting. But in her adult life, she hasn't really amounted to very much. She's kind of got somewhat of a dead-end job. She works kind of with a minimal pay. Has an unhappy marriage with a kind of abusive kind of slob. She has a very fraught relationship with her mother, who is quite vocal about her disappointment and things like this. And her only kind of way of having any type of elation in her life is to dress up as a clown and entertain kids in the kind of the local park, something that she used to enjoy when she was young. But the stress of her life ends up snapping her, and she decides to take her clown persona and go in a macabre serial killer direction. She's also interested in serial killers and kind of classic horror cinema and stuff. So she kind of incorporates these elements to kind of create this sort of mime-like kind of killer clown personality, a la Art the Clown from Terrifier, I guess, but not quite as violent as that. But and basically go on a killing spree, killing people she feels she has some type of umbrage with, but also pretty much anyone else, and it's up to a couple of cops who are tracking her down to try and stop her. What will happen, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. Now, this is a low budget movie, and there are some limitations clearly in place. So we have to look at it in the frame of it's a low budget movie. It's not going to have the production value of, even a kind of a mid-range film, really. That being said, let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. I think our story is quite interesting. It's centers around Jennifer, who is our killer clown. Our protagonist is actually the kind of our serial killer here, so it's following her from her point of view. And I think the movie does a good job of creating empathy, at least to a point, where you kind of feel like she has this crappy life and she just breaks. You know, it's just a kind of a fact that she breaks. Her mother's constantly kind of going on about what a missed opportunity her life has been and how she could have been famous, and she decides now infamy is what she will be pursuing, and ultimately kind of goes in this path of a serial killer, where she has been a fan of serial killers for her life and stuff, and this is now what she wants to do. And we get increasingly sort of more theatrical kills as the sort of movie sort of goes on. But you can't help but feel some empathy for her, again, at least to a point within the movie. And I think our main actress here does a decent enough job of creating this kind of, that sad face clown kind of persona where, it's, you can kind of tell there's this sort of depression underneath a painted smile and stuff like that. So I actually thought the actress was did a really good job, I have to say, and even somewhat of a sort of you feel empathy, but she's also clearly sort of spiraling down the mental kind of path in here, but almost has other elements. So there's a kind of a sexiness to it as well. It's kind of, there's at times she uses her feminine charms to kind of maybe get what she wants or things like this, or get people into certain positions and stuff. So there's a kind of almost like a kinky vibe to it to a certain degree. Nothing on screen, I'll point out, it's just sort of suggested stuff. But I gotta say, I think a lot of that comes from our lead actress here. I think does a very good job in kind of having a very, you know, interesting kind of character to work with here. And although I don't think the script does huge favours in giving this character a huge amount of characterisation, I think the actress does a lot of the heavy lifting here as well. I also think if you were a fan of kind of classic horror movies and things like this, the kind of the final act of the movie, she ends up going to this kind of horror attraction where there is lots of kind of themed kills with various different kind of horror movie characters, some of which are imagined in her head, but a lot of which is, you know, these people, her victims, if you like, actually dressed up as various different kind of horror characters and stuff, and the kills are kind of themed around that and stuff, which is, you know, obviously is kind of quite fun. And I will say, with the acting as well, we really have two main characters here. Our main character, the clown, and then the policewoman. And I think both actresses here do a good job. And there's kind of like the supporting speaking characters as well. I think everyone here, I actually got to say, I thought makes quite engaging sort of characters and stuff that I kind of quite liked. The movie isn't trying to be like a visceral horror film a la the Terrifier movies. It's more trying to be like a kind of thriller. And I think you have to understand the movie, you know, its ambition about what it wants to be. Because I do feel that some people might think this is a little bit of a slower, gentler movie than maybe they might be expecting. But I think the movie isn't trying to be like an out-and-out splatterfest. It's more of a psychological horror in some respect, or psychological thriller, where we are following this woman, you know, really kind of spiraling out of control and down this sort of this path where she's kind of surrendering to this kind of this persona that she's kind of created for herself, and that's the kind of the crux of the movie, and also the kind of the external sort of pressures that she's getting from her, you know, from her family members and things like this, and what she thinks life is expecting of her. So I think in a lot of respects, I think this movie isn't trying to be a flashy film in any particular way, but I think in its subtlety, it actually it kind of works in many aspects in creating a sort of a small scale, more intimate, more sort of you know, slow-paced movie in some respects, but it still has an interesting kind of story with an interesting kind of lead character here. And you know, some of the kind of the directorial choices here I thought were quite strong. As I say, when we kind of go into this kind of horror attraction towards the end, you enjoy a lot of the kind of the set decoration and stuff. But even before that, that's a kind of some kind of nice little elements that are added here. And when she's in her clown persona, she doesn't speak and stuff, so she's kind of writing things she wants to communicate. So, you know, I actually thought this movie was quite engaging, I have to say, despite its kind of sort of low budget aesthetic, and also some of the issues I'll kind of point out. So let's talk about some of the kind of the negatives or things that maybe I didn't think worked quite as well in this movie. There are some small elements here that I think sort of take away some kind of technical elements. For example, there's a couple of scenes where we have characters talking, and then in the background we'll have like people talking in the sort of like in the background and stuff like that. But you'll only hear like the people talking. You won't hear any ambient noise in the background. A lot of the kills. I mean, she has there's quite a high body count in this, surprisingly. But for some reason, a lot of the kills don't really make any, you know, the actual victims never seem to scream, apart from like one or two. But they're weirdly silent when these things are happening, and then no one really kind of fights back. So I think she ends up kind of getting through quite a lot of victims who really don't really seem to kind of fight back at all, or kind of maybe get in a little bit too easily. And a lot of the time kind of silently as well, which I thought was weird. And I get that she's meant to be a mime and she's not going to speak and stuff, but the other characters aren't. So, I mean, there's a couple that make sounds, but like it's weird that when you watch this, you think hardly anyone's screaming or shouting and stuff like that when they're getting, you know, murdered. There's a few instances where, for example, the police are like searching her house or her mother's house, and like they don't turn on the lights, even when they cleared it and that the CSIs are in there kind of doing like, fingerprints or whatever it is they're doing. They don't turn the lights on, or they don't have floodlights, or they're doing it in the dark. It doesn't make any sense at all. We don't get a huge amount of things like the police sirens and stuff where our cops are kind of like driving around. So there's obviously some limitations in regards to the budget. But some of the stuff I think, that example I've just given there, maybe you could say, oh, it's a budgetary issue. But some of the stuff here, like the no lights or the weirdly silent victims, again, it just seems weird. There's also a little bit of kind of like very obvious ADR. Not all through the movie, but there are certain scenes here where the ADR really kind of sticks out and kind of sounds sort of unnatural sort of sounding. The movie is a slower paced movie, despite it having quite a high body count. It's never trying to be a visceral movie, and I do feel that some people will go into this expecting more of a traditional slasher type movie, whilst it isn't really that at all. Now, that's not a criticism I'm going to hold against it, because I feel that's not the movie that it's kind of trying to be, but a fair warning for those who want more of a gory, visceral style slasher movie. This isn't it. This is more of a psychological one. I don't think the characterization didn't quite work for me. For example, like the relationship with her and her husband, we literally only ever see the husband at the dinner table and he's basically being an a-hole. But there just wasn't enough context for me. I mean, how did she get into this relationship? And that's all, he only ever seems to be completely aggressive to her and stuff like that. And I just felt you needed a little bit more context in there. So there's a few things like this. And there's a point in the movie, and I won't spoil it for you, where you maybe switch from having empathy to not. So the first couple of kills, you can maybe feel, okay, you can empathise with her and stuff like that. You can, to a degree, understand, what's driven her to this. You're not saying you support it, but you can kind of understand. But there is a point with a character that she ends up killing. I kind of thought, I don't really know why she has killed this person. And it kind of, the movie never really sort of takes the time to sort of explain the psychological reasons for it. It just seemed odd to me, because it seemed like a departure from what we've kind of seen previously to this, and it makes it feel like it's more random, which it wasn't before. So I feel the movie didn't quite get you to follow in this kind of character's footsteps as well as it could have done, and it ends up being the motivation seems to change through to this character, but the movie doesn't do the work in explaining why that is. That's the best way I can describe it. So the first few kills you can kind of understand, and then it takes a kind of like, oh, okay, different path, but the movie doesn't do the work in really taking us on a journey to explain why. I mean, maybe she's just deranged and that's just the way it is, but again, it needed to do more work in kind of putting that across, I feel. The movie is also a little bit guilty of having a scene at the beginning of the movie which happens at the end. I hate that trope, because you know where it's going to end up. You know what characters are going to be at a certain point in time in the movie, so you're just waiting for that inevitable scene to happen. And there's so many films that I find such a frustrating trope. The movie's ending as well. It's mildly unsatisfying. So I can't even spoil it for you, but yeah, it just didn't. In a way, I think it would have had been better ending on the scene at the beginning of the movie than it had. So there's like a scene after that, but the very final scene to me left it a little bit. It seemed a little bit unnecessary, and I think it would have been a better ending point to have the scene before. It's the best way to describe it. Overall, I still quite enjoyed this movie, and do you know what? I mean, I was thinking about what to kind of score this, really, and part of me thinks an average 5 out of 10, but I got to say I was kind of engaged, and a lot of that is down to our lead performance, and I think some interesting kind of psychological questions that this movie raised. So I'm going to actually give this a 6 out of 10, a slightly above average score, but I do think that it's not going to be for everyone. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave them in comments and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Well, this is a surprise, Batsy. A public bus?
We go where we're needed, Joker.
Oh, lighten up. It's a fun ride.